The Eastern Kentucky subdivision of CSX transportation is nearly 120 miles long, connecting Winchester and Hazard, Kentucky. Sections were built in the early 1890s by fallen flags, with the Louisville and Nashville Railroad completing the route in 1912 between Jackson and Hazard. The EK gave the old reliable access to the rich coal fields of eastern Kentucky, where it competed head-on with the Chesapeake and Ohio. In 1916, a newer, straighter, and more forgiving alignment was completed between Irvine and Winchester, replacing the Riney-B out of Versailles, which featured challenging grades up to 1.7%. Although the ruling grade on the new line was reduced to just 0.4%, two massive trestles had to be built, which were among the longest and highest in the entire L&N system. This bridge over Howard Creek is 2,100 feet long and 225 feet high. Today, there are three principal yards located on the EK sub. At the northwest terminus is the Y-shaped patio yard, where the EK and the CC subs connect. The CC is part of the original L&N main line between Cincinnati, Ohio, and Atlanta, Georgia. EK crews are based here. 29 miles from Patio are the communities of Irvine and Ravena, the location of a large yard that was once the epicenter of L&N and CSX EK sub operations for over 100 years. This aerial footage was recorded in March of 2016, showing the yard empty. Due to a steady decline in coal traffic, CSX closed the car shop and fuel facility in 2000. 3 years later, 28 tracks were removed from Ravena Yard, leaving only 4. In 2016, coal trains were operating over the EK on an as-needed basis. Much of the line was mothballed in October of that year, with trains using former C&O trackage to access the many mines south of Hazard. Hazard Yard is at the southeastern end of the EK. Trains enter the yard from the north by going through a curved tunnel between Combs and Hazard. The only equipment you're guaranteed to see at Hazard Yard are stored cabooses, with some still dressed in chassis system colors. These iconic rail cars are primarily used as shoving platforms for mine runs that back long distances into coal loadouts. Completed in 1949, the L&N extended its Rockhouse Creek branch an additional 17 miles from Blackie to Dean, where a large coal mine, also served by the C&O, was opened. The two railroad companies never interchanged, with both lines dead-ending there. Over 3 subsequent decades, the EK saw an average of 6 loaded and 6 empty trains between Dean and Patio. Finally, in 1980, the C&O and L&N were joined together by CSX Corporation, the successor of both. A connection track was installed at Dean, and as a result, roughly half of the EK's coal traffic was routed over the C&O to Ashland instead. By the early 2000s, daily coal traffic over the EK was reduced to an average of 4. On April Fool's Day 2016, we found a long string of loaded coal hoppers at Hazard Yard. These cars made up the first cut of a train being loaded at the nearby Bluegrass loadout. Since space is limited, trains must load in sections. We found the second section loading at the mine, with locomotives inching toward Hazard Community and Technical College. The grade leading up to the loadout is 2.2%, which is rather steep for trains, but since the hoppers are always shoved up empty, the locomotives can handle the grade with relative ease. While recording the locomotives, we were invited to document operations at the mine by Black Gold sales president L.D. Gorman, who took an interest in our EK subdivision project. Gorman was a coal magnate and still involved in the business at 91. He died in 2022, with Kentucky Representative Hal Rogers and U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell leaving positive remarks in his passing. When this was recorded, Only a handful of mines shipped coal over CSX rails in eastern Kentucky. Since the early 2000s, numerous factors have led to the coal industry's decline in Appalachia, including increased regulations on mining and burning, and a competitive disadvantage against cheap natural gas, Powder River Basin coal, and declining reserves. When we visited in 2016, both mines operated with multiple trains loaded weekly. Back then, there was a great buzz in the coal industry regarding a possible resurgence under Republican frontrunner Donald J. Trump as president. Unlike President Obama, Trump promised to rejuvenate coal mining operations in eastern Kentucky and the Virginias by creating more incentives and loosening EPA regulations. Unfortunately, the resurgence never came, and like many others in the region, both Bluegrass mines ended production in early 2020, with Cambrian Coal declaring bankruptcy the previous summer. Financial mismanagement was determined to be the root cause, but many of the company's employees could see the writing on the wall long before the mine was shut down. This map, still available on CSX.com, displays the operational coal mines in eastern Kentucky as of 2014. The original map contained several minor errors, like the incorrect labeling and location of certain mines, and the exclusion of the 5-mile First Creek branch northeast of Typo. For clarity and accuracy, we corrected the map and added the 3 subdivisions that make up the eastern Kentucky region of the Class I Railroad's 21,000-mile network. Jumping ahead 10 years, only 5 mines remain in operation, with Typo standing as the sole active mine on the EK sub. While on the property, we were allowed to film from the inside of the loading office, where some friendly employees explained the process to us.
Well, we got 110 on this one.
All right, tell me a little bit about the process. What exactly are you guys doing right now?
Well, we're pulling out a stockpile up on top. The dozer's pushing into the hole, and we're putting 116 to 120 ton of car in them, and this right here batches up what the car holds. And you don't load till that gets green.
Anywhere between 20 and 25 a month now, 3 or 4.
This must be real big for us. We got a film crew down here and everything. That right there's a batch bin. So whatever that car costs for it, it'll batch that amount up for each individual car. And like about 10 more cars there, Paul.
That's whatever you think right there. Have they got a crew to come or what?
They gonna recrew over at Lothar. I don't know if Dennis is coming down here or not.
From this vantage point, you can see the headlight of one of the carts exiting the mine while being pulled with a cable to the surface. Once above ground, the coal was dumped onto a conveyor belt, which carried and then dumped the black diamonds onto a stockpile stored at the top of a nearby ridge. There, the coal was processed for purity and then loaded onto another conveyor belt, which went to the loadout. Looking back, with the mines no longer in service here, there are many things we wish we'd have recorded in addition to what's in this documentary. Unfortunately, your host and videographer was only 19 years old at the time and was rather unfamiliar with the visually important parts of mining. Nonetheless, we are grateful to have documented the Bluegrass mines while still in operation. A bay window caboose in the CSX Operation Lifesaver paint scheme brought up the rear of the train. This car was one of several used for mine runs by CSX crews out of Hazard when we visited the area. Once the last coal hopper was loaded, we hurried over to Hazard Yard to record the second cut of the train arriving. Right across the tracks stands the L&N Church of God. Opened in 1944, the church has been attended by many railroaders over the years and still hosts regular services every Sunday. At the north end of the yard, the two GEVO locomotives were cut away from the hoppers so that the caboose could be picked up and removed from the rear of the cut. From milepost 242, near the south end of the yard, we watched the crew tie onto the caboose, pull ahead, and then shove it back into one of the shoving platform storage tracks at Hazard Yard. For reference, Ravena Yard is at milepost 144, 98 rail miles from this location. After watching the crew switch cars for a bit, we joined L.D. Gorman and his grandson for a tour of Black Gold's corporate office. We spent a half hour there before returning to the rails to record the train departing town for Martin. South of Hazard, trains headed for Martin and the Big Sandy travel through a rock-cut tunnel at Lothair before crossing the North Fork of the Kentucky River. As the locomotives rounded the curve, you can see the switch for the Davidson branch, which leads to the Bluegrass mines. Noted railroad photographer Garland McKee documented this bridge in the early 70s. Between Hazard and Dean, a distance of 43 miles, the CSX main line is known as the Rockhouse Subdivision. East of Dean, it's known as the Elkhorn and Beaver Valley Sub, named for a C&O predecessor. This was our final encounter with the Bluegrass train that April Fool's Day. Looking back, documenting the train turned out to be a wise decision. The history of Bluegrass Mines 3 and 4 goes back to 1914, when the Ashless Coal Corporation was formed by the Roanoke-based Buford family. After L&N's bridge over the North Fork was completed at Lothair, the Davidson branch was extended a short distance to serve Ashless Coal. To load the black diamonds into hoppers, the mining company built a unique concrete tipple designed to last. It was truly one of a kind, and 110 years later, it still stands, having been repurposed as a roadway bridge for trucks after the modern tipples were activated. After reorganization in 1922, The mines faced closure in 1926, but were revived by S.R. Jennings as the Waukesha Coal Company. Legal disputes and bankruptcy followed, with J.E. Johnson acquiring the mines in 1929, forming the Bluegrass Mining Company, not to be confused with Jennings Bluegrass Coal Corporation, a separate entity founded in 1915. In 1931, Johnson and an investment group established the Black Gold Mining Company on the Davidson branch, which led to the formation of the Kentucky Bluegrass Mining Company in 1944. Operations steadily declined through the early 1950s, and the last mines were closed in 1953. After the company vanished, the original tipples remained, often taken over and operated by other firms. In 1961, the Whitaker family founded the EAS Coal Company on the Davidson branch, which evolved into the Whitaker Coal Corporation. They opened a new mine, the Hazard No. 4 seam, that mainly ran south and southwest into untapped reserves. The original tipples were reactivated and served the new operation well for over 15 years, but were replaced in 1978 by an 800 tons per hour preparation plant and a modern flood loader known as Bluegrass No. 3. Starfire Mining's nearby tipple was also upgraded. Ownership shifted to Sun Coal Company in 1983, allowing operations to continue on the Davidson branch. Between 1988 and 1989, a $2.5 million expansion improved the processing plant, allowing Sun to recover smaller-sized coal. A second flood loader was constructed and named Bluegrass No. 4 by CSX. Sun closed the mines in June 1995, stunning the industry by laying off 327 miners. The complex sat dormant until Tampa Electric purchased and reopened the mines in 2000 to provide coal for several of its Florida power plants. TECO operated the mines under Perry County Coal Corporation, using Bluegrass No. 4 exclusively. Plans were made to tap deeper seams, the Ambergy and Upper Elkhorn No. 3. New mines started production in 2002 and 2004. In 2011, the Bluegrass complex produced over 1 million tons of coal. Sadly, 3 years later, TECO decided to spin off its coal properties due to unfavorable market conditions. Cambrian Coal, a Booth Energy company, acquired its coal subsidiary in 2015. Under Cambrian, Bluegrass No. 4 became the most active of the two mines, producing over 2.5 million tons between 2015 and 2019. As mentioned, like many mines in the region, Bluegrass was idled when Cambrian Coal declared bankruptcy in 2020. Financial mismanagement was determined to be the root cause. As part of Cambrian Coal's Chapter 11 reorganization, American Resources acquired subsidiary Perry County Coal and other assets for the production of metallurgical coal for producing coke, the primary source of carbon used in steelmaking. The acquisition of Cambrian's Perry County resources gives American access to an estimated 110 million tons of carbon deposits. The deal included the Bluegrass preparation plant, capable of producing 1,300 tons of carbon per hour. American Resources aims to resume production at the Perry County complex soon. Upon reopening, the company intends to hire 76 underground and 16 prep plant employees. As the complex expands its production base, the coke producer aims to increase its workforce to approximately 175 employees. Time will tell if America's plan comes to fruition. Production was supposed to begin in 2024, but as of 2025, no work has begun at the facility. Three days later, we were informed that an eastbound hopper train, T81504, was to take the EK from Patio to Typo. Not wanting to miss a rare opportunity to document the train at Red River, we went straight to the famous bridge. Red River Bridge is 2,200 feet long and 233 feet high, making it the tallest railroad bridge on the L&N system and the second tallest in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. In Ravena, the train stopped for a crew change. The first crew was based out of Corbin, while the second had to be taxied from Hazard to take it back to their home terminal. Using the best resources at our disposal, we've determined that this was one of the last scheduled hopper trains to operate between Ravena and Typo. The U700 series was operating as needed at this time, and by the summer, virtually all coal-related traffic on the EK had ceased. With the Hazard crew on board, the train departed Ravena at 3:15 p.m. Note the former car shop in the background as the train accelerated out of town. A brief resurgence in train traffic occurred in August and September of 2016 due to the derailment of Q539 at Falmouth, Kentucky. 25 cars were involved, including hazmats, which rendered the CC sub out of service for several days. The backlog of traffic forced CSX to reroute important coal trains over the EK to alleviate congestion, including several Georgia Power trains. These reroutes lasted through mid-September, making them the last coal trains to operate between Ravena and Typo, ahead of the line being mothballed that October. Ravena owes its name and establishment to the Louisville and Nashville Railroad. In 1915, the railroad built the town, along with various locomotive and car shops, the yard, office buildings, and station to create a terminal just east of Irvine, the county seat. The name Ravena, derived from the word ravine, was chosen for the terminal by the county, inspired by a request from an Italian foreman and interpreter overseeing construction. He asked the officials to name the station after his birthplace, Ravenna, Italy, which was granted. As construction progressed, Ravenna flourished into a thriving village, especially after the railroad completed its shops in 1915. Over the past century, the town's population has decreased by over 50%, mostly due to the decline of the railroad and coal industries. As of 2023, only 560 people call Ravenna home. Two notable people from Irvine, Ravenna are Kevin Richardson of the Backstreet Boys and Sonora May, a locally known musician and wife of country music star Tyler Childers. Together, the couple both live outside of Ravenna. In 2023, we revisited the EK sub to document unmaintained and decaying sections of the line, like this stretch just east of Ravenna Yard at milepost 146. In January that year, the main line was severed by CSX local crews here and at Chavies, rendering 76 miles of the EK rail banked. The difference in the line's condition in just 7 short years is stunning. Record flooding and a lack of maintenance have really done a number on what was one of the L&N and CSX's most profitable lines. This vintage footage showing the same area just east of the yard was recorded by railfan Joe Vitito on November 5, 1998, showing a coal train arriving at Ravenna Yard with 2 GE AC4400s and a GP40 mother and GP35 road slug set for power. From the east end of Ravena Yard, he filmed the train rolling by the classic L&N searchlights, the same signals we documented in 2016. The grade crossing in view is part of a CSX access road that leads to the Y. Keep an eye on it because a very special train will make an appearance at this very crossing later in the video. You'll also want to stay tuned for more throwback footage from Joe Vitito showcasing the west end of the yard from the Ravena footbridge. Penn-Trex visited the EK Subdivision in 1991 and captured these scenes from Ravena Yard for its Eastern Kentucky Coal documentary. This opening shot shows a solid set of Family Line's engines passing by the fuel pad located next to the modern repair shop built in 1992. Back then, repairs were performed outdoors. This particular view is looking west, showing the runaround track that once spanned nearly the entire length of the yard. Ravena was a very different place compared to today. All the yard tracks were there, and almost every one was packed full of coal hoppers, both loaded and empty, waiting for their next assignment. At the west end of the yard, Penn-Trex recorded this train departing for Patio, likely headed southbound on the CC Sub to Georgia Power Plant, using the same Family Lines lash-up they had filmed earlier by the fuel pad. The contrast between then and now is striking. As the camera pans upward, you can see the many tracks that are no longer there today, removed in 2003. Penn-Trex later captured this EMD-powered coal train crossing the massive Red River Bridge, a scene that can't be replicated today. Access to this location has since been cut off by a local property owner unfriendly to rail fans. These days, if you're lucky enough to see a train on the EK, the only view available is from the north side of the bridge, half a mile away, on a country road with trees blocking much of the massive structure, a far cry from what Pentrex captured here in 1991. Jumping back to 2016, we caught up with hopper train T815 in Beattyville, then a town of about 1,300 in Lee County. Between 2010 and 2020, its population grew roughly 65% to around 2,150. Established in 1851 and incorporated in 1872, the town was named after pioneer settler Samuel Beatty. The depot at Beattyville was built around 1890 by L&N predecessor Lexington and Eastern, and is still occupied by what's left of the CSX signal department. With virtually zero train traffic since the fall of 2016, CSX removed all sidings between Prize, just south of Ravena, and Chavies in the summer of 2022 and spring of 23, totaling over 10 miles of rail. Beattyville siding was one of the longest, at 10,081 feet. Between Talega and Athol, the train rolled through one of the many tunnels located on the EK sub. We observed the locomotives on an ancient wooden bridge just before they reached the western portal. Athol siding is located between mileposts 185.8 and 187.4, reaching 8,638 feet. The signals at North Athol, including the dwarf that directed trains out of the siding, are still standing as of 2023. The main line lies atop concrete ties, evidence of the EK's importance as a heavy haul route through the Bluegrass. In 2016, we caught train T815 rolling through a sweeping curve in Athol. The siding was still there, and the thought of it being removed one day was unimaginable. Up until 2020, many rail cars, mostly grain hoppers and well cars, were stored here. Once removed, the rails from the EK sidings were supposed to be relocated to the Pan Am Railway, which was acquired by CSX in 2022. Unfortunately, for unknown reasons, CSX scrapped the rail harvested from the EK sidings, leaving piles of railroad ties behind. At Chenaui, we caught the train climbing Elkatoy Hill, the steepest grade on the eastern Kentucky sub, at an average of 1%. The crest of the grade is just outside the north portal of the nearby Chenaui Tunnel. The grade peaks at 1.2%. Roger Richardson began his career with the L&N out of Ravena in 1974 and retired in 2009. We asked him about what it was like to run trains over this challenging section of the line and how busy it was in the early 2000s before the final downturn in the coal industry.
With the exception of the hill at Elkatoy, it's river grade all the way from here to Hazard. You follow the river with the exception of that one hill there at Jackson. With a loaded coal train, you're throttled back all the way from here to, with the exception of a couple of flat places that level out, you're pulling all the way, and you can't maintain track speed with a coal train. They usually kept a couple of engines there at Jackson to push you up the hill, and then when you get to top of the hill, they'd cut off and go back to Jackson. You rarely went either direction without meeting a train, either taking the siding or holding the main. You usually met a train or two or three every trip you made. When they came from Jacksonville to study the yardmaster's jobs upstairs, the night they studied my job on third shift, I called 13 trains. It didn't take long for me to realize that it wasn't going to last forever. When I went to apprentice program, we had hostlers on every shift. We had yard jobs on every shift and relief jobs for those jobs. And I could see in 3 or 4 years I'd be able to hold a job right here at home in the yard because I had enough older guys that were going to retire. Well, by the time they retired, they'd cut those jobs off.
This footage was recorded in 2020 from the last storage train between Ravena and Chaves. Here, we see the train approaching the west portal of Chenoweth Tunnel. This portion of the railroad was constructed by the Lexington and Eastern around 1890. It was only completed as far as Jackson before the L&N acquired the line in 1909. An extension to Hazard was completed in 1912, with the first train arriving at Hazard Yard on June 17th. We spoke to railroad historian and longtime L&N Historical Society member Ron Flannery about the line's engineering and the challenges train crews faced while climbing the hill.
It was a boring railroad in terms of operation because it was well engineered and was all downriver. It was engineered so that coal would move downstream on the North Fork of the Kentucky River, except across Elkatoy Hill. In the steam era, if you had an M1 that started with, let's say 9,500 tons out of Neon, literally all the engineer would do would be to, kick off the brake, drop the reverser down into the corner, maybe kick the booster on, get the train rolling. And from there on, it was either level or slightly downriver. So the only challenge was the rolling resistance from all those cars. You may have, 140, 150 cars back there. Well, as they go through, reverse curves of, 8, 10 degrees back and forth, all that builds up to a lot of resistance. So you had to work steam through those curves, but it wasn't like going up a, 1.5% grade. So it took a lot of skill to move that tonnage downstream, but it got easier because it was well engineered.
After exiting the east portal, trains go through the unincorporated community of Yeadon. This is where locomotives were cut away on the fly. Westbounds were the only trains that required helpers, as eastbounds were always empties heading to the mines. When this was recorded, helpers were no longer needed out of Jackson, as traffic on the EK was exclusively eastbound empties until the end of October 2016.
The grade across Elkatoy, which was out of Gentry, just north of Jackson, was built because they had to avoid a really circuitous route the river took to the north that would have cost an arm and a leg to build and would have cost a lot more time in terms of transport time. So they chose to build across that little watershed divide to get to the other side. They were always either on the North Fork of the Kentucky River or a tributary. In the post-war era, they took a serious look at rerouting or some way reducing the grade. According to John Tilford, who would later become president of the L&N, it was going to be around $15 million, and they said that was just prohibitive. They couldn't swallow that. So they looked for other alternatives. The other alternative was the F3 Black Cat diesels. And in doing that and making that kind of commitment, it was also to get their toe in the water of diesel electric power for freight service. They were happy with the E6s they'd used in passenger service since 1942, but hadn't tried freight units. They had a lot of yard engines as well. But the hill at that time needed two 282s around the clock. So you had two engine crews shoving coal trains over the mountain. So they were able, in one move there, to eliminate one engine crew. So that's already a savings. And so with 3 or 4 F3s and an M1 on the point, they were able to handle 9,500 tons. So that became more cost effective than trying to reroute everything. I'm sure, all things being equal, they would have probably liked to have an easier route over the hill or a different, easier grade. But in some cases you have no alternative. Geography wins and you just have to deal with it. If you have to deal with a gradient that's there, you can either go under it, and that's not practical. You can go over it at the expense of a lot more track that coils up one side and coils down the other side, or you can just say, this is really bad, let's just go up and over it and keep a pusher engine here, and that's what they did. And you see that kind of scenario a lot in American railroading in places where they had to deal with grades. You just live with it and it becomes a pusher district. And so those are the realities.
Near the bottom of the hill at milepost 195 is the location the railroad has always called Gentry. Wolverine loadout was located here, which you can see to the left as the train passes by the site in 2020. We're not exactly sure when trains began to load here, but we suspect it opened sometime in the mid to late 1970s. Arch Mineral, one of the largest mining companies in the United States, was its operator for many years. Arch acquired Falcon Coal Company in 1987. Despite low coal reserves, the company purchased Falcon to access long-term contracts with major utilities. Following the acquisition, Arch restructured Falcon's operations to improve profitability. Key actions included reducing transportation costs, renegotiating labor contracts, and streamlining operations by consolidating loaders and closing mines, leaving only 3 active and only the Wolverine loadout open by 1988. Wolverine was enhanced to handle large volumes efficiently, with conveyors and a high-capacity flood loader accessible from the nearby Kentucky 30, making coal transportation more efficient. Eastern Kentucky transportation historian Robbie Vaughn noted that Cumberland River coal signage appeared at the Wolverine tipple in the early 2000s, leading to speculation that Arch Coal may have spun off parts of its North Fork and Cumberland River operations at that time. In 2010, a second loadout was installed at Wolverine, a major investment when the coal industry began to show signs of a major downward spiral that ultimately led to its closure only 5 years later. Still, Wolverine was processing enough coal at the time to load multiple trains every week. Near the end, the loadout was sold to and owned by Revelation Energy. Wolverine was closed for good in 2015. When we visited in the spring of 2016, it was vacant. The infrastructure remained in place until the spring of 2020 when it was demolished. As the EK continues toward Jackson, it crosses Wolverine Road and enters the western portal of the O and K Junction Tunnel. The tunnel's name is derived from the Ohio and Kentucky Railway, a short line that once met the EK main line at a junction outside the east portal. Construction began on the tunnel in June 1890 and was completed days before the first train rolled into Jackson on the 15th of July, 1891. The Ohio and Kentucky Railway's origins began in 1899, and the first 26 miles were completed to Cannell City by 1901. A short section of Wolverine Road was part of the right-of-way. The line was extended another 13 miles to mines near West Liberty between 1910 and 11. The O and K was abandoned, and its trackage was removed by 1933. Despite being over 90 years since its abandonment, the O and K name remains on official USGS maps of the area. As mentioned, Jackson was the home base of manned helpers going back to the 19-teens. This water tower west of Jackson Yard was built in 1904 by the Chicago Bridge and Iron Works Company for the Lexington and Eastern Railway, predecessor to the Louisville and Nashville. After the line was completed to Hazard in 1912 by the L&N, the water tower became a vital refueling station for trains running to and from Perry County. The tower featured an electric pump and lines that supplied water from the nearby river. The tower also included insulated piping, an agitator, and a heater to ensure the water didn't freeze in the winter. Ron Flannery spoke to us about Jackson's significance as a community and helper base along the EK.
Jackson became a very strategically important place because of the pusher service. They had a nice brick depot, a substantial freight station. They had a pedestrian overpass. It was a pretty substantial investment of L&N money in Jackson, and it was an important place. Initially, the helpers weren't based there. They were based at Gentry, about 2 miles past, just outside of O and K Junction Tunnel. But Jackson was always the maintenance base, so when engines need to be serviced, they came to Jackson. They'd get coal, water, whatever they needed. When the M1s were new on the EK, if they had an empty drag of anything other than 100, if they had 140 empty cars, that was more than an M1 could drag up the north side of Elkatoy Hill. So the helpers would have to go across and hook to the front of them and pull them across the top, even though it was empties, because it was just above the tonnage rating. If it were 110 cars, the M1 should make it, but 140, got to be helped. When the diesels came, that became the maintenance base, and they kept a diesel technician at Jackson. Anytime they had a problem with one of those F3s, it was all new motive power to those guys, and they said, smoke's coming from a wrong place, you know, we're coming in. And so they would take them into Jackson and service those things. And that's where they were fueled and sanded. And also they had a coaling station there at Jackson, so the through trains that were going north stopped and took coal, water before they hit the hill. So Jackson was a pretty important place. The first time I ever visited Jackson was in the mid-60s, and because, you know, I didn't have the kind of mobility. I was a teenager, and you just couldn't say, well, I'm going to Jackson, Kentucky, particularly in those days, because road network, the highway network was so bad, you had to have enormous desire to go somewhere. It's like Elkhorn City, Kentucky. You know, I'm going to Elkhorn City, Kentucky. Why? Why would you know, you weren't born there, why do you need to be there? Because it was an ordeal to go places, and it was, this was the nature of the Appalachian region. It was really a region apart from the mainstream of America, mostly because of a sense of isolation. Some places were better than others, but some places were like incredibly isolated. Jackson was a great community. In the mid-60s, I mean, they had a thriving business district. I remember getting a grilled cheese sandwich at a little dinette. It was great. By that time, they'd moved the helper back to Jackson instead of Gentry, and they had 3 F units assigned there that day, an F9 and a rebuilt F2 and an F7. L&N's diesel fleet was kind of like Frankenstein creations, you know, a little this and a little of that. But I stayed there long enough to catch 3 coal trains going up the hill and 1 empty train coming down, and I thought, man, I got to get back here. And then life intervened, and it was a few years before I got back over there. But it continued to be a hot place for activity. All trains, unless they were a local or a mine run, got shoved. In some cases, if empty trains were of sufficient length, the helpers would go across the hill and pull them up the other side because that was a grade as well.
When we visited Jackson Yard for the first time in 2016, it was a far cry from its glory days. The rails were already beginning to rust, which seems strange considering the concrete ties. In 2023, we revisited to see even further decay. Kudzu had overtaken the main line. The yard tracks and the 8,221-foot passing siding were removed in 2022. Ties were piled high toward the middle of the now absent rail yard. In hindsight, we're grateful we recorded this footage back in 2016. From that October until 2020, the EK sidings and Jackson Yard were used for car storage. Most sidings were removed before catastrophic flooding in 2022 that rendered much of the EK's infrastructure unusable. More were removed in 2023, including Evelyn. The removed sidings were a combined 53,989 feet of track, or 10.23 miles total. The salvaged track, as previously mentioned, was supposed to replace lighter rail on the Pan Am. All that remains is an abandoned Kentucky-made coal company SW9 and 2 boxcars. The EMD locomotive was used at Falcon's Tipple in nearby Cragen, sitting there for about a half-decade until it was moved to Jackson Yard approximately 2008. A local CSX conductor told us that he was going to go pick it up because an individual or company had bought it. So he and his engineer went down to Cragen, where they found the locomotive zip-tied with a rubber yard air hose knuckle to knuckle. The whole setup was a mess, so they couldn't hook up the air properly and had to make do with that hose. They managed to pull it to Jackson Yard, but eventually an FRA inspector or carman took a look at it and declared that there was no way the locomotive could be allowed on the main line in that condition. Whoever owned it must not have wanted to pay for repairs, so it was left there to rot. As of this video's release date, no one knows who owns it. When the local train master inquired about its ownership, the conductor who shared this story recounted his tale of moving it. So CSX decided to leave the locomotive in place after the yard tracks were removed. Jumping back into the cab, the train continued eastbound, paralleling Armory Drive. The 2022 and 23 floods in Breathitt County greatly affected this area, covering parts of the EK main under several feet of water. The 2022 flooding was historic due to an unusual series of severe rainstorms that dropped over 10 inches of rain within hours. The flash floods devastated towns and communities, damaging or destroying hundreds of homes, businesses, roads, and bridges. The floodwaters rose rapidly, reaching levels that hadn't been seen in decades, trapping residents and forcing hundreds to be rescued. The death toll in Breathitt and surrounding counties exceeded 40 people. President Biden declared the flooding a federal disaster, allowing federal resources to assist with rescue efforts, emergency housing, and cleanup. Another round of severe flooding affected the region the next summer, though the impact wasn't as intense as in 2022. Many residents were still rebuilding from the previous year, so the 23 floods exacerbated the struggles in Breathitt County. Milepost 199, east of the rail yard, is where a lumber yard is located. You can see the switch to the left that connected with the now absent siding. In the early 1990s, it was one of 5 customers in Jackson and was known back then as Frederick and May Lumber. and was one of the largest non-mining related shippers on the EK. Unfortunately, ownership has changed through the years, and CSX refused to serve them in recent times because of low car count. It's been many years since the site has received rail cars, either in or outbounds, so when the siding was removed in 2023, they took out the switch also. After regular revenue service on the EK sub ceased and Ravena Yard was shut down as a crew terminal, the line was repurposed in 2017 for storing unit trains. Initially, the CTC signal system operated normally, but rust buildup on the tracks from a lack of regular traffic interfered with the signal circuits, making them unreliable. This meant signals could incorrectly indicate a train had cleared a section when it hadn't, or suggest a train was approaching when it was still further down the line. While the system wasn't officially suspended, train crews needed dispatcher permission to pass all positive signals, even though intermediate signals could still be followed as usual. Occasionally, a dispatcher unfamiliar with the area would issue signals as they would for regular traffic. This wasn't a formal documented policy, but rather an unwritten adjustment shared internally among dispatchers. As the train continued past CP South Jackson, the line returned to single track, winding its way along the North Fork of the Kentucky River. A mile south of yard limits, the train approached the Dumont Tunnel. Legend has it that dozens of railway workers, former convicts, lost their lives while digging out the tunnel, built sometime around 1911 when the line was extended to Hazard. Locals say the power lines running through it ring daily from 1:03 p.m. to 1:13 p.m. It's widely believed to be the workers who died during its construction who are calling out for help. We're pretty sure that there's no merit to this local legend, but it's widespread, so we thought we'd at least share it with you. As you travel through Cragen, Kentucky, you'll notice a concrete bridge, marking the path to an intricate coal loading operation. In the mid-90s, a coal processing facility owned by the Kentucky May Coal Company, a subsidiary of Ashland Coal, was located just before the concrete bridge. The facility, tucked out of sight from the public highway, processed raw coal from trucks to be crushed, sized, and reloaded. The coal made a short journey, roughly a quarter mile, to the rail transfer loader near the bridge across from the North Fork. The Cragen Tipple used a series of structures to support coal loading. Coal from twin truck dumps high on the hillside was stored in a stacking tube before a conveyor transported it to a flood loader towering above the Cragen siding. Despite their age, the facilities remained clean and bright until they were demolished in the late 2000s. Trains were regularly loaded here until approximately 1995, with unit trains filling up 2 to 3 times weekly. We caught up with train T815 at Haddocks, an unincorporated community 60 miles southeast of Ravena, where the EK crosses the North Fork of the Kentucky River on a truss bridge. Immediately after crossing the river, the train passed the idled Andy Coal loadout. Note the stored coal hoppers circling the hill. Trains were regularly loaded here until approximately 1995, with unit trains filling up 2 to 3 times weekly. The first mines opened in this area around 1852. A post office was established in 1916 and named for early settler Samuel Haddocks, a native of Virginia. The post office closed in 1994. This area was heavily affected by the record-setting flooding of 22 and 23, displacing many residents for weeks. 30 years ago, there were 3 loadouts at Haddocks, with Andy being the most distinctive. It's now the only one left, but it's hidden behind a natural peninsula formed by the meeting of Troublesome Branch and the North Fork. Andy features a rare balloon or loop track design, the only one in all of eastern Kentucky. Unlike other tight, confined valley loadouts requiring multiple cuts, this design allowed trains to enter, load, and exit seamlessly without needing to split consists or backing up. The loop track was made possible thanks to a deep natural cut through the hillside, offering L&N and later CSX to continuously load trains here. Sigmund Coal Company contracted A&T Manufacturing for the construction of Andy in 1973. The company was owned by Ed and Harold Sigmund, brothers with years of mining experience. The brothers also owned and operated the Sigmund Coal Tipple north of Hazard in Bullen, Kentucky. They later sold it to Lost Mountain Mining. The first train was loaded at Andy in 1974. Records indicate that Addington Coal Company acquired the property in late 1994. It's unknown if Addington ever loaded a train at Andy, as the details of ownership and operation post-94 are uncertain. What is known is that in the early 2000s, Andy loaded trains briefly. A fly-by-night operation, Williams Brothers, a shell company for Kentucky Fuels Corporation, acquired the property, likely from Addington, and made a minimal investment to get things up and running. They only loaded 2 confirmed trains and then folded. We were told a contractor rebuilt the loop track, but was stiffed for nearly $100,000. Until recently, James C. Justice's Kentucky Fuels Corporation owned the property, but hadn't paid property taxes in years, so the county seized the site. The property was auctioned off in 2023 to a private owner who invited us to tour and document the loadout for this video. Wick, Kentucky was the last location we caught train T815 as it continued toward Typo. Note the foundation of a burned down house still standing to the left. Looking back at this footage, it's hard to believe the EK Sub hasn't seen a coal train between Ravena and Typo in nearly a decade. What was once a busy main line with 12 daily trains, 5 active mines, over 10 miles of passing sidings, and concrete ties on the main has essentially been abandoned. Combined with the recent 100-year flood of 2022, it's unlikely that rail traffic will ever return, as there are now many rock slides and washouts present between Jackson and Typo. Back in 2016, a dark future was hanging over EK communities like Ravena, a town that had once boasted one of the busiest rail terminals in the entire Commonwealth. The local economy had been on a downward spiral for more than 3 decades, but this time, the situation was dire. Without trains full of coal or railroaders to operate them, a sense of uncertainty gripped the town. Many residents questioned whether CSX would abandon the railroad entirely, leaving their community in the depths of economic despair. And could they really be blamed for asking such a question? After all, only 4 of the original 32-yard tracks remained, and all were empty when we first visited. Saplings were sprouting up across the entire property, with the yard starting to resemble a nature preserve rather than a rail terminal. The old car shop was still standing, but was also showing signs of decay. Although it seemed like the end at the time, it was really just the beginning of something new. 2 months prior, on 2/7/16, the Kentucky Steam Heritage Corporation was founded by area rail preservationists who wanted to see the rebirth of Chesapeake and Ohio Kanawha 2716. They were looking for a place to call home, and the long-abandoned Ravena car shop appeared to be a great candidate. Yes, to Kentucky Steam, Ravena's future looked bright.
When people think about Eastern Kentucky, they think about the mountains. We're really the gateway to Appalachia and the rest of Eastern Kentucky. It's so beautiful here. We've got the hills and hollers, the forests in every direction. We have the Red River Gorge right next door, and you couldn't ask for a better place to be. The coal industry pretty much drove the entire economy of Eastern Kentucky for a long time. And even though there were no mines here in Estill County, all that coal coming out of the hills ran right through here on the railroad. The coal mines and the railroads were definitely the #1 employers in the entire region. The L&N is where it all started. The town of Ravena wouldn't be here without the L&N Railroad. They needed so much infrastructure and support that they built their own town to support the railroad operations here in Estill County to handle all of that coal coming out of Eastern Kentucky.
When I was growing up, coal was king, and the L&N was what moved it all. It's a small town, and it's backed by the hills, and the sound was when the trains were coupling, and just that thud, 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 thud. It's almost like thunder. But that all changed, and I really think that Eastern Kentucky needs something to hope for.
Wherever you fall in the debate over coal, you can't argue the fact that the decline in coal production in Eastern Kentucky has had a huge economic impact on all of these communities, whether they have mines, whether the railroad built up that community because of the coal loads. And over the last decades, it's taken a long time, but that decline has really hit a lot of our communities hard. And I tell you, we're really looking for something to be hopeful about.
You know, there's a commercial on TV that says that coal keeps the lights on. Well, the L&N did more than keep the lights on. They kept food in your belly, they put clothes on your back. We were a coal town, although there is not a coal mine in Estill County. But again, we're here because all the coal up in that area, the L&N had the contract for it, and it had to come through here. So when CSX, the systems consolidated, L&N was no more, so they could take that coal down through Pikeville and down the eastern seaboard. And then after the merger, it was just plain economics. It was not economically feasible. Then our coal wash shut down. The last major unit trains that came through here, if you looked on the side of them, they went to Georgia. And then after that, there hasn't been, other than for storage, there hasn't been a train through here. I think September will be maybe 2 years since a train has come through here. But we've survived.
The board of directors of Kentucky Steam Heritage Corporation started looking at sites to restore 2716. We were looking all throughout Kentucky, particularly central Kentucky, and just didn't find anything that would really suit our purpose. But when we made the trip to Ravena for the first time and came across the Green Bridge there across the Kentucky River and saw the steam rising off the mountains, we knew that we needed to find a way to make Estill County our home. Upon talking to all the locals and realizing that everybody in Estill County and the entire region has some tie to the railroad, most of them are second, third generation retired railroaders themselves, we knew Estill County would be our home.
The Kentucky Steam Heritage Corporation is a Kentucky-based 501c3 public charity, and we're interested in helping revitalize the economy of Eastern Kentucky through railroad-related activity. And the hallmark of our endeavor is to restore historic steam locomotive number 2716. It was built 75 years ago, and it has a history of being in Eastern Kentucky. It was operated almost exclusively in Eastern Kentucky, and to bring it back and to revitalize it is kind of a way of saying we can make Eastern Kentucky what it once was through different channels. And we feel like that 2716 showing up in Ravena, in Estill County, and in Eastern Kentucky and Appalachia is really a big deal, and we're excited to partner with corporations such as CSX and the R.J. Corman Railroad Group to show what we can do and what we can do for the communities.
CSX is a much, much larger company, and over time, as the economy has changed, they haven't needed this area as much from a business standpoint. So to see them look at us, little old Estill County, little old Eastern Kentucky, and say, you know what, we want to invest in this community that has been good to us for so many years. It's heartwarming to see a corporation to reach out, and you can really feel the sort of the human influence there. It's amazing.
We're bringing about some change in an area that badly needs it. The Kentucky Steam Heritage Center will be a center point of Ravena, Kentucky. It's in an area that we've recognized that needs a hand up. CSX is proud to stand by and give that hand up. And we're really looking forward to seeing the area turn around and become very vibrant again. It's already showing signs of it, just what little we've done already, and it's terrific. The thing that sets the Kentucky Steam Group apart is the fact that they have a plan. They're just not a bunch of dreamers. They actually have a written down goal, and that they're realistic in their goals. They're not trying to do a wide expanse and save everything under the sun. They've got a very intimate goal of it that they've had. They've stated it to us, and it's a very realistic goal. So CSX is proud to help the Kentucky Steam Heritage Corp, and we look forward to working with them in the future for some potential fun stuff. And we look forward to revitalizing Eastern Kentucky, which is the main goal.
We've gone from boom to bust, so to speak, and I think this would be a resurgence, a boom. It's going to breathe life back into this community. I truly believe that.
Kentucky Steam Heritage Corporation owes everything to both our corporate sponsors like CSX and R.J. Corman. This is only the beginning, folks. 2716 arriving in Ravena is only the beginning of this 4-year vision that we've had for Kentucky Steam Heritage to transform not only Estill County, but transform the entire region and give Kentucky something to be proud of.
Between June 26th and 28th, 2019, Kentucky Steam, in cooperation with CSX and R.J. Corman, moved 2716 from New Haven to Ravena, Kentucky. The 3-day journey was over 150 miles, with stops at Louisville, Frankfort, Midway, and Lexington. The train reached 60 miles per hour on the CSX mainline sub en route to Louisville. On day 3, the train ran over the EK. We intercepted the consist at Patio Yard as it made its way east. The Heritage Highball was the first passenger train over the EK since the General visited in September 1962. 2716 was also the first steam locomotive to ride the EK since then, making the Heritage Highball a historic event. Between Patio and Ravena, the train stopped at Howard's Creek and Red River for CSX corporate photographers to capture the train atop the high bridges. After the quick photo ops, the train continued east, where crowds of onlookers were waiting to greet it. A crowd exceeding 1,200 was gathered at the aptly named Choo Choo Park to see the train arrive in Ravena.
That's California math. Tim, you want one? Got it. I'm good. Good. Oh, great. Good. We made it.
It's just kind of overwhelming to the point of almost numbing, but in a good way, to see all these people and see all the expressions, the kids, the adults, people that have never seen one of these things moving before or seen one at all. And that's what it's all about, is seeing, you know, people from just the general public be overwhelmed by something that you brought to them.
That evening, the train set was relocated to Kentucky Steam's lead track on the south side of the yard. Joe Nugent, a founder and Kentucky Steam board member, provided us with this footage. Clinchfield 800 was chosen to lead the Heritage Highball because of its historic role in moving 2716 from the Kentucky Railway Museum, then based in Louisville, to North Carolina, where it was to be restored by the Clinchfield Railroad for use in company-sponsored excursions, including the Santa train. In 1979, the 800 made a memorable journey through Kentucky and Tennessee, accompanied by a vintage caboose and Clinchfield business car number 100 as it transported 2716 to the Clinchfield. Unfortunately, not long after the restoration process began, the rebuild was abruptly canceled due to a management scandal involving embezzlement, forcing the Clinchfield to cancel its mainline excursion program altogether. As a result, 2716 was hastily reassembled and sent back to Kentucky. 40 years later, the two were united again on yet another historic move, this time over the EK sub. Since the shop track had not been reinstalled when 2716 arrived, the highball train remained stationary for several weeks until the roadbed and track were in place. On July 31st, the Alco-built steam locomotive was placed inside the former CSX car repair shop for the first time. At the throttle of Clinchfield 800 was Charlie Poling, the museum director of the Southern Appalachia Railway Museum. Poling and volunteer conductor Ryan Markham had the honor of spotting the locomotive inside the shop. This achievement was a monumental event for the young Kentucky Steam Heritage Corps. Only 4 years into the organization's history, it had accomplished the impossible by acquiring the former CSX rail yard and shop facility at Ravena and successfully moving a large steam locomotive over 150 miles of CSX mainline.
Hit the pump 2 miles per hour. 5-4-800.
Alright, starting the building now, Charlie. About 2.5 to the spot. One small step for man and one giant leap for Crisco. We ain't stopped yet.
Jason and Chris, what is the next phase in the Kentucky Rail Heritage Center, and then of course the next phase of the restoration?
Well, the next phase for this whole project is to sleep.
Yes. Phase 1, sleep.
I think everybody needs to take some time away from trains and to go do things that aren't trains. We've been inundated for a month plus of 24 hours a day, track, prep, planning, everything. And this is the...
Time gets away, it's like 6 weeks.
Yeah, month, 2 years, I don't know. But we're all gonna take a breather, and then the next step is to start disassembly of the locomotive and to come up with a very regimented and very organized way of cataloging the parts to make sure that we know where everything is, and then start working on it. We've got a shop. We've had a shop since we closed on this thing in October, and now it's time to start using it.
The last time a steam locomotive visited Ravena, Kentucky before the arrival of 2716 was 57 years earlier, in the summer of 1962, when an American legend rolled through the heart of eastern Kentucky. The General, a Civil War-era steam locomotive, was touring the Louisville and Nashville Railroad system that year. From August 9th through the 11th, it traveled through eastern Kentucky on the EK sub. Ravena resident Hugh Parks filmed the visit on 8mm color film, and his grandson, Anthony Hardy, preserved the footage, now shared publicly for the first time. The General was famously stolen by Andrews Union Raiders on April 12, 1862, in modern-day Kennesaw, Georgia, to disrupt Confederate supply lines between Atlanta and Chattanooga, Tennessee. It was chased and recaptured near Ringgold, Georgia, by conductor William A. Fuller. Surviving the war, the General became a Southern icon, inspiring a 1926 Buster Keaton film about its famous chase. It was later displayed at the 1939 World's Fair and restored by the L&N for its 1962 tour. What you're seeing is the General on public display outside the former Ravena passenger station. After stopping in Ravena, the General continued east for public displays in Beattyville, Jackson, and finally Hazard, where it overnighted. The next day, Friday, August 10th, the General continued its run from Hazard to Neon, Kentucky. Then, on Saturday the 11th, the locomotive and combine embarked on their longest leg in eastern Kentucky, running all the way from Hazard to Richmond, switching from the EK sub to the CC at Winchester. This second stop in Ravena was much shorter than the first, but the crowd still gathered to see the engine in action. The General took on water here, fueled by the local fire department. Many familiar faces appear in this footage, including members of the Parks family. In this scene, we see Margaret Hardy, Anthony's mother, and his older brother Gene, then just a toddler, along with other school children visiting with the train crew. Mrs. Jessie Parks, wife of Hugh Parks, is also seen chatting with the crew. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming, with the crew happily signing autographs and posing for photos with locals. It's clear from the smiles that the train crew enjoyed the moment. In the background, looking up at the tender, you can spot a fire hose from the fire department used to refuel the locomotive. In this scene, Hugh is standing beside a string of coal hoppers on the south side of main track number 1, with the General and combine parked right next to the L&N passenger station in Ravena. Passenger service ended 6 years prior. The station, which housed division offices and the dispatching center for the EK, was constructed in 1915 and demolished in 1979 after dispatching was relocated to Corbin and local operations were shifted to the yard office, now the headquarters of Kentucky Steam. Check out that line of classic cars parked alongside the depot as the train prepared to depart. What's neat is that Kentucky Steam's Heritage Highball was displayed at this very location in 2019. Although the station was no longer standing, seeing 2716 where the General took on water was an incredible moment for many locals who remembered this special weekend in August 1962. Here we see the general departing for Patio, with residents gathered to send the crew off on their journey to Richmond. In the background, coal cars await sorting in Ravena Yard, a reminder of the area's deep railroad roots and its reliance on the coal industry. Here you'll see the general passing by the abutments of the former Ravena footbridge, which was destroyed by a 1961 tornado. This incredible scene shows the engine crossing the massive Red River Bridge. The general, dwarfed by the span, makes for a truly dramatic image. Thanks to Hugh Parks and Anthony Hardy, this unseen footage lets us relive a powerful moment when a Civil War icon met the people of Eastern Kentucky under its own steam one last time. The tour continued into Winchester, where the locomotive changed tracks at Patio Yard, marking the end of the EK sub. Railroad officials can be seen at the rear of the combine, now preserved at the Kentucky Railway Museum. As for the general, it lives on today in Kennesaw, Georgia, preserved at the Southern Museum of Civil War and Locomotive History. Since acquiring the former CSX rail yard, Kentucky Steam has made major improvements to the site, cleaning up debris, vegetation, and hazardous materials. It hosts annual events on site like the community-led Ravena Railroad Festival, whistle and horn blows, and seasonal train rides. In 2023, the Hardy Pavilion was completed, an outdoor music venue resembling Ravena's railroad depot and yard office platforms. The venue will allow Kentucky Steam to earn revenue outside of operating excursions, which can be used to advance the restoration of C&O 2716 and other historic rail equipment. Local musicians performed during the 2023 and 24 Ravena Railroad Festivals from the stage, and it is expected to host larger acts soon. In addition to the museum, the former L&N Yard office will soon house a gift shop, ticket office, and meeting spaces. Across the tracks from the office, a full-service restaurant and brewery will provide year-round dining and catered events. The wrap-around outdoor seating area will be integrated into a passenger train-era loading platform adjacent to the tracks. On August 25, 2019, Clinchfield 800 pulled the second leg of yet another special freight move. CSX had recently donated EMD SW1500 number 1100 to Kentucky Steam, and Pax Rail's flat cars were to be delivered to the organization at Ravena. After we were notified of this rare move, we decided to follow the local delivering the locomotive and flats from Patio to Ravena, where the crew would pick up the 800 and a single gondola, then returning to Patio that evening. At Patio Yard, the local crew of train C705 tied onto the flats, which were carrying 2716's friction-bearing tender trucks before continuing east over the Eastern Kentucky sub. Ravena, the train slowly eased into yard limits. Number 1100, formerly Louisville and Nashville Railroad number 5000, would aid the organization in switching historic railroad equipment around the property. The locomotive was donated by CSX that July. In operating condition, the 1100 would be a huge asset to the growing Kentucky Steam as they continued to develop the Heritage Center.
.1100 is extremely important because, well, it's our first L&N piece of equipment. It was actually operated on this line, so it's actually native to this area. It's really important also because it's close to running. We haven't got it running yet. We're going to do some inspection work and stuff to it, but once it's here on the property, it's going to be our main switcher engine. It's going to actually help us move 2716 in and out, as well as the other equipment that we have here. So we do have a nice campus here to work with. We have a Y, we have a half a mile of track, and then of course we're adding track to it. So this SW1500 that CSX donated to us is just going to be really, really important for our early stages of actually operating here on the campus.
The 1100 means we actually have a way to move equipment around. We have all this track, all these pieces of equipment, and no way to move them. Now we do. We'll also be able to utilize the caboose with the locomotive, the caboose that CSX gave us to shuttle people around, give rides during the Ravenna Rail Festival, things like that. And it'll aid in the restoration of the 2716 because this will need to be moved multiple times between the shop and the pits for taking things apart and other sorts of service work.
Once the 1100 and flat cars were set into place, Clinchfield 800 and a single gondola were taken by the local CSX crew to Patio Yard. The gondola had been used to transport railroad ties to Kentucky Steam, which were donated to the organization by CSX that spring. The ties had been used in laying new track to the shop building. Now having to be returned, it was decided to use Clinchfield 800 as the lead locomotive, since it was already facing west and needed to be interchanged with CSX for its next assignment in Ohio. For many, seeing Clinchfield 800 in Ravena was an awe-inspiring experience. Because of the downturn in the coal industry, nothing exciting had happened on the EK in many years. Truly, this was an unprecedented move. An F unit leading a freight train on CSX in 2019 was almost unbelievable. Indeed, miracles do happen, and we were thankful to have had the opportunity to document this historic day. We captured this footage from atop the Irvine walking bridge at the west end of the yard. Back in the 1990s, when coal was still transported in large quantities in and out of Ravena, railfan Joe Vitito recorded this rare video from the same location in November 1998. Note the additional tracks that were removed in 2003. With C705 on the main line headed for Patio, we jumped ahead to Mina Station, where the Red River Trestle spans 2,200 feet long and 233 feet high above the valley below. As the longest and tallest trestle on the L&N system, the small train was dwarfed by the massive structure. Clinchfield Railroad number 800 started life as an EMD F3 locomotive built in 1948 for the Carolina, Clinchfield, and Ohio Railroad. Upgraded to F7 specifications in 1957, it powered freight trains through Appalachia before shifting to business service under the Family Line system and later the Seaboard system as number 116. With the formation of CSX in 1986, number 116 received the early CSX paint, but was soon repainted into the Bright Future scheme. After retirement, it served on the American European Express and MARC commuter trains. CSX donated the unit to the C&O Historical Society, which painted it as C&O number 8016. In 2017, CSX restored it to its original Clinchfield gray and yellow, honoring its heritage as a Clinchfield icon and part of CSX's lineage. Further down the line, we captured the train at the Dry Fort Creek Trestle. With the sun setting slowly on the horizon, 800 tied down at Winchester around 7 p.m., bringing C705 safely back to Patio Yard with ease. After her brief stint in Kentucky, 800 went to the Buckeye State for the Ohio Rail Experience, pulling excursion trains over the former Detroit, Toledo, and Ironton Main Line. The donation of the EMD locomotive was facilitated in large part by Ryan Markham, a Norfolk Southern dispatcher at the time and longtime friend of Kentucky Steam. Built for the Norfolk and Western Railway in LaGrange, Illinois in May 1978, the 3,000 horsepower locomotive served the N&W until 1982, when it joined the Norfolk Southern roster. For the better part of 30 years, the locomotive operated in mainline service. Its final decade with NS saw the veteran locomotive in local service with its last assignment in Decatur, Illinois. Kentucky Steam member Nick Hovey of the mechanical team contributed these video clips of the locomotive being delivered. 6162 was rebuilt to run short hood forward sometime in the mid-2000s by Altoona Works. In October of 2013, it was repainted into the Norfolk Southern horsehead scheme. Even after being shopped, the locomotive retained its original Leslie RS5T air horn, the sound of the N&W Railway. With 6162 now off CSX rails, Kentucky Steam's locomotive crew proceeded to Y the engine under its own power. Now part of the Kentucky Steam diesel collection, the locomotive joins a select few SD40-2s in rail preservation. In October 2023, it was returned to its as-delivered Norfolk & Western block-style lettering. Although the EK main line is now dormant, there's still plenty of train activity in Ravena thanks to Kentucky Steam. In September 2022, we visited the annual Ravena Railroad Festival to ride the corporation's excursion train across the yard. Although these trips are rather short, the nonprofit can operate up to 6 trips per day, allowing the organization to earn money toward restoration projects like C&O 2716. This 040 tank engine, the number 85, is nicknamed Mac. It was built in 1928 by the Vulcan Iron Works for the A.E. Dick Construction Company of Scranton, Pennsylvania. It operated in the company's stone quarry until 1933, when they sold it to the Jeddo Highland Coal Company near Hazleton, Pennsylvania. Jeddo assigned the locomotive number 85 and used it in their mining operations until 1964, when they sold it to a collector who moved it to Horseheads, New York, where it remained until 2010. It was later purchased by the Gramling family of Indiana, who restored the engine back to operation. The Gramlings trucked their locomotives to events like the Railroad Festival, allowing volunteers from the hosting museum or railroad to operate them. Although Ravena Yard is now a bright spot with lots of potential for future development under Kentucky Steam's ownership, there's no telling of what the future holds for the rest of the EK. We're still holding on to hope for the once prosperous main line, but time will tell of its fate. Lord willing, there may be some positive developments in the future. Every now and then, CSX runs storage trains in and out of Ravena Yard. Although all sidings on the EK except for Sloan are gone, Ravena's 4 tracks provide CSX with over 4 miles of storage capacity. In August 2020, Jacob Riley recorded train U352 pulling a cut of covered hoppers from Ravena to Patio ahead of grain season. He caught the train at several locations, including Sloan. This was the last storage train over the EK as of this video's release date. As mentioned, the EK is severed between Ravena and Chaves, Kentucky, approximately 78 miles. There are only 2 customers left on the last 20 miles between Chaves and Hazard, Hazard Explosives in Chaves, and Black Hawk Mining's Typo Loadout. On October 18, 2024, Jacob Riley caught CSX train R233 with a single covered hopper for Hazard Explosives. CSX Tier 4 GEVO number 3363, a 4,400 horsepower diesel-electric locomotive, was used to transport the car. It was part of an early order of ET-44s from General Electric. Its boxy exhaust, as opposed to the modern sloped exhaust, is a key spotting feature. The design was changed by GE shortly after production began to solve clearance issues at coal and grain loadouts. Hazard Explosives receives cars of ammonia nitrate from CSX on an as-needed basis roughly once a month. Without a set schedule, it's nearly impossible to plan a railfan trip to document the only train operating over the EK north of Typo. Thankfully, Riley was in the right place at the right time. Until recently, the final 17 miles of the EK was double-tracked. It used to begin at CP Parrott, milepost 224.8, and continue to Hazard Yard. Main 2 was rendered out of service in 2024. Roughly a mile of it is missing between Parrott and Krypton. The south end of the EK is home to numerous L&N searchlight signals and double tunnels, providing plenty of photo opportunities for the railfan willing to chase through the hills and hollers of eastern Kentucky. At Chaves, Riley caught the train crossing Kentucky 28 as it approached Hazard Explosives. With only one car inbound and none outbound, the train crew would return to Hazard engine light, running long hood forward the entire way there.
They don't.
Krypton is home to a beautiful sweeping curve that makes for the perfect eastbound shot in morning light. As you can see, Main 2 is missing, so it's likely local CSX crews are in the process of removing the entire thing. As of January 2025, the double track is active to CP Rose at milepost 234.3. Combs was the last spot Riley caught R233 that day. We're grateful he shared his historic footage with us, as it's the only known video of a train south of Haddocks. We hope to document this end of the EK ourselves, but with such limited service, even to typo, it's hard to say if we'll ever get the opportunity. With its future hanging in the balance, we hope the EK can be saved from abandonment. What was once an important and prosperous line built to serve the coal fields of eastern Kentucky is now but a severed artery of CSX's massive 21,000-mile network. To see more of the EK's current condition, we recommend checking out our video titled The Sad State of the CSX EK Subdivision, which covers the massive washouts and erosion in great detail. Although the EK is in dire straits, Ravena remains a bright spot, with Kentucky Steam hosting a multitude of annual events for both music and rail fans. We recommend visiting the former L&N Railroad Yard and Museum the next time you're in the area. Call ahead to schedule a guided tour around the property, where you'll be able to see Kentucky Steam's historic rail equipment up close and personal, including Chesapeake and Ohio 2716, which is currently being restored as of summer 2025. Once the restoration work is complete, 2716 will be an oil burner and eventually visit the Railroad Museum of New England, running on the Naugatuck Railroad in Connecticut. When the Kanawha is finally brought back to life, we'll cover its first trip over the EK since 2019, and we can only hope that CSX will let her operate under steam. Until then, thank you for watching Delay in Block Productions. Happy railroading!